My brother said you look like who?
Bill Maher.
Bill Maher.
See, I always got Joe Pesci in college.
Joe Pesci.
Joe Pesci. Oh, yeah.
Because I don't trust anybody in the room to tell me if there's boogers in my nose. Have a good show.
Yeah. It'll be good. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see at the end.
Okay.
I never know how this is going to turn out.
You're listening to Conversations in Bed with me, Joleene and
And me, Ken Case.
This is the freshest, funnest, most fantastical podcast out there that supports healthy, polarized relationships that takes place right in our bed. Don't go anywhere. We're about to give you the goods on love, life, and leaning into truly powerful relationships right now.
Welcome back to Conversations in Bed. Thank you so much for making sure you can hear us as you drive along the roadways or if you're watching us, wherever you may be sitting. Thank you so very much. I'm Joleene and
And I'm Ken Case.
And we are here today to talk about what, my love?
Guilt and shame, the differences, the significance of them. And yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Do you remember how we came up with this to talk about originally?
I don't.
It was during a conversation in bed. It might have been, because we go so deep into things. It might have been a conversation about Brene Brown. It might have been a conversation about, you know what? I was struggling. Here it is. I was struggling with something, and you reminded me that I need not feel guilty about it because I didn't do anything. It was done to me. And what I was feeling was shame.
I was just going to say. And so you said not to feel guilty about it. That's the funny thing about guilt and shame. Some people, sometimes those terms get used interchangeably. And I think that's what we're going to do today is look at a little bit of what's the difference between guilt and shame.
Let's look at it and let's share examples. I'm going to be super vulnerable and I'm going to share something that I have not shared on social media at all you're aware of. So you can guide me through it a little bit, but it is what I felt guilty about. Mm-hmm. And you reminded me that it was shame. We've had conversations. We've listened to Brene Brown talk about it.
Yeah.
And we feel compelled to share it with our audience because this happens in relationships where one partner may feel guilty or shameful about something. And we want to talk a little bit about how opening that space to talk the vulnerability, which is courage, truly can bring a couple closer together. So
yeah, and it helps you resolve shame. Vulnerability will help you resolve shame.
Say more.
So, well, we'll get into it a little bit here, but without vulnerability, that shame just stays within you. It stays with you. You have to be vulnerable. Like you just said in the beginning, you're going to be vulnerable in this podcast, right? So by being vulnerable, by letting it out, by talking about these things, you can release that shame, because shame, when you come right down to it, shame makes you feel small. Shame, you want to hide. You feel unworthy. So by not being vulnerable and addressing issues, that shame just takes over.
My goal by the end of this podcast is that listeners feel strong enough to share in a way that cleanses them, essentially, where they know they don't need to be ashamed about something that may have occurred.
Yeah.
That they can, we're gonna talk about how to move them through it so they can cleanse that part of them, and it's all part of growth.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And hopefully entice them to look a little further to look at the experts, right? Mm-hmm. The people that really, truly, lend a hand to explaining all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the queen is Brene Brown, of course, in our eyes.
Yes.
So,
as she's been called, Vulnerability Ted. It's a funny bit, but
yeah, Google it or go to YouTube and you'll understand where that comes from. All right, my love. What are you drinking? What's in our mug?
So Burke's Beans. Burke's Beans, one of our favorite sponsors, our first sponsor. First sponsor. Thank you so much. But this is a springtime serenade, I believe. Right? Is that what it's? Yes.
During the summer.
Springtime serenade. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A Kona blend. Explain what a Kona blend is.
A Kona blend, so it's a blend. So the Kona bean, the only thing that can be called a Kona is, I believe it comes from the Kona area of Hawaii, right? And so in order to be a Kona blend or call itself a Kona, it has to have a certain, I believe, a certain percentage of those beans. And there are also other beans that are in here. Costa Rica, I think, because we were saying you're going to Costa Rica, and I think this one may have some beans from there. Here's what I know about Burke's Beans coffee, and this is really all I need to know is it is delicious.
Yeah, I know. You know, one of the fun parts about this podcast is when sponsors step up with their coffee, and we are so humbled and so grateful for it. We get to drink it and have all these different experiences, and we're young connoisseurs in it, but it's getting better.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you to Greg. Also, we have another sponsor. So you can see if you're watching the podcast, we're going to have to speak it for those of you listening. We wear matching t-shirts, and I know that's corny, but here's the reason we do it, is we have all of these phrases that should be on the front of the t-shirts, and we're still seeking a sponsor we give them the phrases and they can create iron-ons. But the t-shirts that we're wearing were donated by a follower on TikTok, Rachel Oatman Day. Thank you so much, Rachel. We're always chatting in the comments. She's been following me for a while, and I'm very, very grateful for her presence. She saw us on a live where we were asking for sponsorships, and she donated all different color t-shirts. I think we got 3 packages.
Yep.
She just keeps sending them. So once we can find a sponsor, when you do watch us on the podcast, you'll see all of these catchphrases. Oh, baby, that we use.
Watch my microphone, baby.
Baby. We're wearing green for those of you out there in audio land. But yeah, so before we dig in, we always share a question that we surprise each other with. I'm going to surprise you with this one. Yeah. They're not hard-hitting, friends. We just like to, I find it fun.
Yeah.
Educational.
Yeah, I mean, I get a little apprehensive because I don't know what this question is going to be. And
plus, you got to answer. You got to get to the answer.
Yeah.
All right, here's the question. You ready?
Drum roll, please.
If I had a catchphrase, what would it be?
Funny, we're talking about t-shirts and catchphrases. Boy, I'll allow it. I'll allow it is in a whole big. That is it's just a whole big. That is one of your, and it's funny because you say these things and all of a sudden people around you, we all start saying them. I'll be at work and, my boss at work, who just retired, I talked to him quite a bit about us, and he knows about, the whole big, and he knows about that, and his wife follows you and stuff like that. And we'd be at work and we'd be talking about something, and I'm like, it's a whole big, and he'd start to chuckle, and I'm like, yeah, it's just contagious. So
I've been saying it for years, and my friend David and I would exchange that during college because everything was a chore. That was another one. It's a massive chore, and it kind of morphed into this is a whole big thing, because sometimes things just grow and there's more tasks and more emails and more buttons to push when you're on hold. So it's become a fun way of saying, holy, this is going to be a whole big thing. It's a whole big thing. But yeah. How about you? If you had a catchphrase.
I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, but for a catchphrase, I would say this all the time, and I think I still do. I would always say "cool beans."
No,
it was just something that came out, and I'd be talking to somebody or whatever, and like acknowledging whatever they're saying, and it's funny because people at work have picked up on it.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you don't use it here.
Yeah, I don't.
You know what I know that you use here?
It's an age thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool beans.
You'll say absolutely.
Oh, that is true.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Or, and this, you said it more when we were first talking on the phone. If the conversation would kind of come to a lull, you'd go, too funny. Too funny. And you use it a lot. And that was your way of like, there's a lull in the conversation and you're trying to keep it too funny. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's too funny.
That's too funny.
Yeah. Absolutely. You picked up. But you're right. You are spot on.
Whole big.
Yeah.
All right. What do we got today, babe?
Shall we mosey along? Well, yeah, talking about the difference between shame and guilt and what they're about and how they come into play in our everyday lives and how they really shape us.
I want you to lead this conversation because this was something we talked about, that you were talking about in different circles before you and I met, which is what brought on the conversation, which is what brought on the desire to do this topic. So can you start by defining the difference between shame and guilt?
Yeah. So the difference between shame and guilt, at least as I understand it, is, guilt. Guilt is something that you did wrong. If you did something wrong, and you can say, I'm sorry I did that. If you can add an I'm sorry to it, that you realize that you did something wrong, then that's guilt. That's
so
guilt.
I did. Okay, guilt is I did.
Yeah, guilt, exactly. And shame is I'm wrong.
I am.
I am. I'm what's wrong. And guilt can be good. Guilt can be self-serving. Guilt can be serving because you realize that you did something wrong, so you can fix that behavior. Where shame really has no positive impact on what you're doing, because all shame really does is minimize you. Shame really makes you just want to disappear. It makes you're not worthy of anything. You're small. You're not worthy. You are the problem. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of anything. Where guilt, on the other hand, again, you can recognize your fault. You can recognize your mistake, and you can then, if you choose to, you can then go ahead and correct that and make it a positive a positive serving thing. And shame, again, the way I understand it, and just listening to people, it presents itself in different ways. So for women, for example, shame would present itself again as not being enough, not being good enough, not being pretty enough, not getting the work done, not other mothers looking at you and you're not being the best mother. And so you're hiding yourself, and you have that shame behind those things, and just not being able to be good enough. And for men, it presents itself in a different way. And for men, it really comes through because what we've learned as men is that you need to be, don't be weak, which again, we'll get into with vulnerability. Vulnerability is seen as a weakness, right? And it's not. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It's probably the highest show of strength that there is. But growing up, we were taught, that you, as a man, shame will come in as you're not good enough at work. You're not fixing things. You're not making enough money. You're not, strong enough. So those things are what comes into a man's life as shame, and that minimizes us, and that really makes us want to hide. And so being vulnerable and trying to address that shame, the antidote, I don't know if it's the antidote to shame, but it is that vulnerability, and letting you be able to expand, be able to talk to people about why you feel the way you do. And then you can get past that shame and realize it's not you. You didn't do anything wrong. And I kind of learned that in right through counseling.
Right.
Right. It was brought to my attention, and I never heard the differences, never realized the differences. And that was brought up. And, what moments made you shameful, and why do you feel that way? And inserting that phrase that you are worthy, you are worth the time and the effort, and you are worth the love. And so getting past all that stuff is really the difference between shame and guilt.
This episode is made possible thanks to Burke's Beans, a gourmet coffee roaster out of Concord, California. Organic and sustainable coffee beans made your way. Visit burksbeans.com to place your order. Also, special thanks to Rachel Oatman Day for the t-shirts we wear. We're so grateful for your support. If you'd like to sponsor Conversations in Bed, drop us an email at Joleene@takeyourvoiceback.com. The email address is in show notes. Now back to the goods.
Vulnerability is really where it comes into play, because you have with having shame, you're not able to move into being vulnerable. And without vulnerability, you're not able to move into expanding things and being able to invent stuff and being able to take a chance, because you just hide under that rock.
And so that's the next step, because you said earlier when you were defining the difference between shame and guilt, that shame doesn't have a resolve, but indeed it does. And I knew that we would get to that, but that's in the initial thought of it, that there's no resolve. I'm going to be vulnerable because I think it's important to share something that I felt great shame for, but I mistook it as guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I mistook it that I did something wrong. And so it's something I didn't share for two reasons. One, for decades, I didn't remember. But when I did, I attempted to share an experience with people and I was shamed for it.
Mm-hmm.
And not outward scolding, but let me explain and I can get into it. So in my journey of healing, I recognize the importance of speaking to things that have happened to us and learning, I guess you could call them coping mechanisms in your journey of growth. And mine is that as a very young child, for I'd say a period of 4 years, I don't know, it could have been 3, it could have been 5, I was abused. And I'm trying to avoid a particular word on the podcast here, but I was sexually abused. So we're just going to say it because that's what it is. And there's the shame, okay? The shame comes in. Thank you. I felt for the longest time that I was a willing participant because I was present. Willing is the wrong word. Let me rewind that. But because I was a participant, even though I wasn't a willing participant, that I was responsible for the actions that were taking place. And I wasn't. So when the memory came back and I remembered it, and this is a whole nother story for another time, I was in my 40s and thought that if I shared it with key people in my life, that it would somehow lift the burden or somehow give me comfort. And I was opening a space, being vulnerable, and hoping that if I invited someone into it, they could say something to soothe me or do something to soothe me. And what ended up happening is one person had no response. And that's a heavy thing. So let me be clear. This isn't a judgment on the responses. I'm sharing how the responses affected me. And so that one lack of response was horrible because I wasn't being heard or maybe taken seriously. And a second response was someone asking me if I was remembering it correctly, which that was a big one for me. Boy, did that shut me down. I was ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled with, because I thought the shame and the guilt, I think, merged in a way, because there wasn't an action that I was taking as a very young girl to provoke this or bring it on. I was merely a tool that was being used. And there was a lot of shame around that. So to your point, when you were talking about how it affects women, all my life I sought perfection because those moments made me feel not good enough. I was small. I made myself small. I made myself wrong. I was very triggered and reactive. I mean, I'm talking about creating a lifetime of all of these words. As I grew, I got better at being reactive. I got better at being angry. I got better at being perfect. Like I had to show up perfect. I had to, and it still happens in many, many ways. You, frankly, have alleviated a lot of that and helped me accept myself more and more. But you are such a big part of the equation. And I'm saying this because those that can hear us, having a partner, whether it's a friend or a romantic partner in your life, that helps carry you through these spaces so you're not ashamed, reminding you that you don't need to be ashamed. And you helped me remember in that moment, there was no guilt. And there was another conversation too, and it had to do with my marriage. I felt guilty for leaving the marriage because of things that were happening as I moved on, when really those were things my partner had to move through and heal. And you reminded me that I need not feel guilty, that because I didn't do anything wrong. Certainly in any relationship that falls apart, both parties are responsible for that falling out. but I was somehow taking it all on. And you reminded me that I didn't have to feel that way. I did my best. And there was nothing, there's always moments where you say or do something and you feel guilty about it. And maybe we can talk about that in a bit, because I want you to share anything that you may have, any experiences you've had. But I think sometimes you have an action that you're guilty of and there's guilt, and then you feel shame after because you created this scenario and may have caused pain on someone, and then there's shame with that.
Mm-hmm. This is just, for you, I know this is just it's just, I know that you remembered a while ago,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think it kind of got repressed again or came back down. And then when I came in,
That's right.
It started to come up. And this is a different topic, but we had talked about why now? Why
the memory?
Yeah, well, why is it coming up? And one of the thoughts that we had, that I shared with you, and I think maybe you agreed, talking about shame and talking about, one of the ways to get around it is being able to talk about it and being able to work through it and seeking out somebody. Maybe it was coming up because now I was there, mm-hmm. and you were starting to feel a little bit safer, mm-hmm. to be able to talk about it. And so then it started to come up. And I again, I'm just, maybe I'm reaching, but I think
that's accurate. That's 1,000% accurate.
And and that was heavy.
Mm. You're right, because before, when I put it on the table, it just kind of stayed on the table.
Yeah.
You picked it up and you put it in front of us and you said, I've got you. And you did create that safe space. And so the coming up, and then we'll move on. The coming up that you're talking about, Ken, is I had a very visceral response, a very emotional response, mm-hmm. more than once, where the tears were, I wasn't just sobbing. I was like, it was a whole big thing. It was big. Mm-hmm. It was big.
Yeah. Well, that it doesn't get much bigger in somebody's life. So, so for me, there certainly are episodes, that you're shameful for all through your life, right? It's just, looking back on it, I think one of the ones that I can that's relatable maybe to people, I don't know, was, isn't this ironic, from my marriage, right? And being ashamed of how it came about because it was my second marriage, right? So I'd been through the first marriage, right? And then coming onto the second marriage. And again, no shade on either side. Like you said, it's a two-way street. But I took on a lot of it, and looking back, there were other little things, but I'm not pushing it off on anybody, right? But when it did come time to realize that it's not healthy in any stretch, and she was in the same boat, she actually made me kind of realize that. I was very resistant to that because, I don't want to be seen as a two-time loser.
No, baby.
Going through another marriage and being, and for whatever reasons it may be, and of course, doing the work that we've been doing individually and now together, has really changed that dynamic. And again, not to get off topic, but I've talked about it before, where people from the past, I'm sure just like you would feel, they may look at this and look at me and saying, he's just trying to make an excuse. He's just full of it. No, this is a real epiphany. This is a real changing. It has to be, right? So, but getting back to the shame, I felt shame in that divorce, and the way that it was going, because I failed again. And I was a two-time loser. So much so that I asked, can we just kind of keep this quiet? Because my parents are still alive and I don't want them to find out. And we were at a space where it wasn't, we weren't at each other's throat. We weren't going to kill each other. It was just what it was.
It was amicable, as they say.
Right. Yep. So wanting to keep it quiet, mm-hmm. and really when it came around, and a few people in my life knew, mm-hmm. but not a lot. Because of work circumstances, it was explainable that we weren't in the same space,
mm-hmm. yeah.
At the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I was blessed and you came along, and then it was like, if this is going to move forward. And boy, it was just, it was everything I had ever asked for. There came the time when you got to address it. You got to bring it up. But that shame really, really centered around failure of a marriage, failure of another marriage.
How did you feel telling me? And well, do you remember my response? Or the feeling? If you don't remember it, do you remember the feeling?
Of telling you that I was married twice?
Of telling me that, and then my response to you, how did you feel?
I don't remember your response.
But do you remember how you felt in that entire moment during that conversation?
I very apprehensive. No doubt. I'm trying to think back on how I would have felt. And I would have been extremely apprehensive and not knowing what the response would have been, quite honestly.
So after the conversation, do you remember what the feeling was? It's okay if you don't. Harry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think relief. Right. There would have been that relief because
you know why there was relief? Because I didn't judge it.
It's true.
You know?
It's very true. Yeah.
Because I remember this conversation, and I think there was a little confusion because I remember you had your twin daughters with your first wife.
Oh, right.
And I didn't know you were married twice, and it doesn't matter, but I just didn't know. I assumed it was one marriage. And you said something about the kids going back and forth, and I know that your girls are in their 30s now, and I thought, what? And then I must have asked something or said something, and you said, oh, well, that's for my first marriage. I was married twice.
Yeah.
And you made a little joke about it. And in that moment, I remember thinking, don't you dare judge this man. You don't know a thing about him. And how vulnerable and courageous, because I could tell there was apprehension to share that because you judged yourself. And I did not want you to think for a second that you needed to. But
that's that shame, right? That's exactly what it was.
You know what? And here's the truth. In a past life of mine, or a different era, if you will, I would have looked at that. Most people do. And I did a TikTok on this. 2 marriages. Oh my God, what's he doing wrong? But here's what I realized. And I've been married and divorced once. We grow and we change. Mm-hmm. And it has given me such a different point of view with other people who are on their second, third, even fourth marriage. You are not the same person with any of those people. You are not who you were in either one of those marriages. I'm not who I was. Yeah. This is not who my first husband was married to at all. So and I want to put that out there because for those who may kind of scoff at someone who's been married 2, 3, 4 times, whatever, you don't know their story. Mm-hmm. It's really unfair to judge. And holy shit, sometimes we just go through things and then you find an incredible partner.
Yeah. So that's where that was really the probably most, I don't want to say the most relatable shame story I have, you know. I'm sure there's others, but realizing and starting to learn and starting to do the work as to what shame is. And again, we have to talk about vulnerability when we talk about shame. And I've said this many times, and I've said this in some of our podcasts and other things. You make it so easy to be vulnerable. I mean, that's what we're looking for. As a man, we're looking for somebody who's not going to judge us, who's going to let us, you tell us to tell our story, to be vulnerable. I don't mean you per se. That's what we're told to do. And then some people just are, they just shut down and they won't accept that. So we clam up and we talk about that stuff. And Brene Brown's got a great story about that.
I love your story. I love who you are. And that's the thing is when we are unhealed, we're selfish. This is my opinion. I was very selfish in my unhealed state, so it was always about me. I find it more engaging, exciting, loving, entertaining, learning about you. Paramedic Ken, we should make a Barbie. Paramedic Ken, pilot Ken, musician Ken, daddy Ken, all the things that you have, and when we're in your home and where I see different things in your home that were a part of you, it's nostalgic to me. And because I've matured to that place to know I mean, you're 60 years old. Clearly you had a life before I came along and vice versa. And how magnificent is that you brought up two girls.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have all of these incredible accomplishments in my eyes. And sometimes other people don't show us who we are. And that's also vulnerability, you know?
Yeah.
And to let you know that I saw something this morning, and we've heard this before. We do the best we can in the moment we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So a final thought as we wrap things up. What can we offer the audience when it comes to if they're in a space of shame, feeling shameful about something, and maybe their partner doesn't know how to hold the space for them? Where can they go? What can they do? And I might be putting you on the spot with this question.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the first step is really recognizing
whether it's shame or guilt.
Whether it's shame or guilt.
Yeah.
And again, if you've done something and you can say, I'm sorry, you know, that of whatever that action may have been, then that's probably guilt, you know. But realizing that shame and why you have that shame or why you feel these feelings, I think probably the first step, I mean, and the most important step is you have to be able to talk to somebody. That really is being able to get it out there and be vulnerable, right? And it all comes back to vulnerability, to be able to talk and put it out there and really, you know, if it's counseling, go for counseling. If you have a dear friend that you can start to open up to, that's a great place to start.
I want to offer this because you make a valid point. Sometimes we think we can open up to someone and we're not sure. You can test the waters with a friend and say, I have something big that I need to get off my chest. Can you hold the space for me? If they know what that means, if they know what hold the space means, you will see energetically that they can accept it. And you can tell them, this is big and I'm ashamed. And if they come to you and say, you do not need to be ashamed, I've got you, it's a good start. And then you kind of inchworm your way into it. So I think that's a great way, using that kind of language to kind of test the waters to see if it's a safe space. Because, and the truth be told, you'll know. Like the first person I shared my childhood experience with, I knew he couldn't hold the space. I was like, finger crossed, hope that he can. But yeah, counseling too, and nothing to be ashamed of.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a great place to go and talk. I think that stigma is been removed a lot.
Yeah.
You know, nowadays. And it's there's so much to be gained. And if you're gonna you know, move ahead in life and create the things you want to create and be able to move and be able to fail and be okay with failure and then go through it, then yeah, absolutely. You have to have that vulnerability to be able to do it. So
speaking of language,
yeah,
our next podcast episode, we're going to talk about the way we share language as a couple to get through potential conflict and how it really does make a difference. So if you have conflict with your partner or you want to approach a subject with them, but it may trigger them, we're going to share how we get through it. And look, you guys, we have been through it with our past partners. It's been explosive. It's been rageful. At least I'm speaking for myself. So to avoid that and have conversations where not only do you not ignite a flame or a fire to cause potential problem, you snuff it and it brings you closer.
No doubt. We've been there.
We've been there.
So we'll be there again.
Yeah, but it's going to be so good.
It's going to be so good. Yeah.
It's going to be so good. So thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate it. Tune in next time. You guys have a great night, evening, weekend, morning, whatever time of day it is. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.